Sasa mimi kazi yangu ni ndogo tu. Nitakuwa nawezesha watu waongee. Sina mazungumzo ya kwangu, lakini nawawezesha wenzangu waongee, na kama ilivyotangazwa mada yetu inazungumzia mazingira ya utendaji kazi wa Azaki. Nafikiri ni agenda ambayo toka asubuhi imeanza, tumezungumzia tu na mpaka tumefanya na scoring au tathmini kwa kutumia utaalamu kuona ni maswali gani yale ambayo yanatusaidia kujifunza kuona sekta yetu inafanya kazi namna gani. Sasa ili kusudi kuweza kuendeleza na kufahamu vizuri kwamba sekta yetu iko kwenye njia panda kama alivyosema Dr. Stigmata, au inaelekea njia panda au imeshapita njia panda, sasa imepotea na njia inakokwenda, basi nitakuwa na wazungumzaji watatu ambao watajaribu kuelezea mtazamo tofauti tofauti ya jinsi tunavyopiga hatua. Msemaji wangu wa kwanza ni Misrache Gondo. Naomba inue mkono tu. Can you raise up your hand? Are you studying? Lakini ngoja niwatambulishe tu. Yeye huyu kama alivyosema, yeye anatoka Zimbabwe, na she's a development practitioner with over 12 years of experience in civil society. Amebobea sana katika masuala, hasa katika masuala ya uongozi na mifumo in the region. Tumeongelea hapa uongozi, lakini pia mifumo yetu inayotusaidia kufanya masuala ya accountability kuwa more effective na impactful. Rache is actively engaged in a range of cross-sectoral networks, position herself as a strategic connector and a contributor within Africa accountability and the policy ecosystem. She's particularly passionate about strengthening accountability ecosystems, focusing on the institutional and relation conditions that foster meaningful state and citizen engagement. So atatusaidia hapa kuweza kuconnect the practices of what she has learned in the region, but with the realities of what we are discussing today. In connection to that, I have my sister Nikiwe Kaunda. Kaunda ni mjukuu wa Kaunda wa Zambia, wa Malawi. Kumbe wako wengi wanatoka sehemu nyingi. She's also a social justice and development practitioner with over 18 years of experience working in the region and international non-profit organizations. She has experience with the multinational organization, working with the government institutions to promote good governance, accountability, and high impact programs. Again, she is going to complement on these issues, giving her concrete examples on especially case studies on how some of the practices we are discussing here have been able to be translated into action, and what impactful it has brought, and some lessons to take forward. Watatu ni ndugu yangu Fulgence Masawe. Huyu tunamfahamu. Inua mkono wa kuone bwana. Yeye atazungumzia pia katika muktadha huu kujaribu kucomplement kwa wenzetu kitu walichokuwa wameongea, na nadhani itatusaidia katika kuibua maswali, kuendelea maswali katika wiki inayokuja. Will be more or less brainstorming questions, which makes us to keep thinking and reflecting, making analysis on how we need to break the barriers or improve on what we are doing best. So without due delays, let me invite my sister Nikiwe, and then while she's coming here, may I ask you all of us to stand up. Maana naona tumekaa muda mrefu sana. Tusimame tu wote sasa tena. You're welcome. Wanasema sasa tunataka Dr. alisema kwamba fikra za zamani tuziache. Hebu moja mimi bado nirudie ile ya zamani. Let us do some an exercise for us to wake up. Ndio. I want us to write 4 by staying like this. Do that, write 4. Hapa ni ile ni. Usawa wewe. Kama karibu. Muone mwenzako kama anaweza. Changamsha. Hiyo tunaweza. Atuandike nane. Tuandike nane hivi. Kaide. Karibu.
Thank you. DigiView, are you able to project? Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be in Tanzania. Thank you for having us. My name is Nikki Wekawunda with the Southern Africa Trust. Really, my interest and background is on enhancing, our capabilities as civil society organizations around governance, accountability, a high impact and responsive programs. So coincidentally, Dr. Stigmata, it's like you jumped into my laptop and you were a little gremlin because everything you spoke about is what is detailed in my presentation. So some of the issues I'm not really going to speak too much into because in that opening, that marvelous opening welcome, she actually delved into many of the same issues. If this was a test, I would fail, I know. But so my task really was I was asked to set the scene, and my colleagues were going to delve deeper into the question of, interrogating our identities as civil society, looking at our roles, our purpose, and our relevance, and just helping us to articulate some of those questions we should be asking ourselves. Because I think for a lot of us that have been in the sector doing this for a while now, we're either tired or, we're tired, we're drained, or we really just don't have, that space or the capacity to rethink and re-look look at things in a fresh way. And we're, really desperately looking for ways in which we can do things differently and do things better. So, the concept really of civil society as a third sector, it's not questioned. I think that, we are given spaces. We are recognized as a significant stakeholder, so that is not really in question. And, starting out primarily as, charity-based, entities, we've moved on to focus on more, substantive human rights, civil liberties, political issues, and now we're even venturing into leading programs and doing research around geopolitical issues, around natural resources, around technology and AI advances, and of course things around the environment. So really what has changed are some of the issues that we're working on. Other changes that you might have noted are we're getting an increasing number of think tanks around the continent. I think as of last year we had 211 think tanks, and this is very important because it's all about the narrative. It's about how we articulate our experiences, our culture, our past, but it's also how we articulate where we're situated, what is happening around us now from an African perspective. So that is very important. The other thing that we're seeing in the sector really is that we're dealing with more complex problems. More complex in the sense that they tend to be more global, or at least regional. So how we dealt with the global pandemic, COVID, the fact that we are working in a more interconnected way. We're talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, what that means for trade, what that means for free movement of people, and the work that we do around economic justice. And this interconnectedness, of course, is great, but it also means that we are more susceptible to shocks. So what happens in Tanzania would actually affect somebody in Botswana, for instance, because of the interconnected and integrated way in which our economies and our societies are now operating in. Yeah. And then I'm farsighted. I can't see my notes. Sorry. So, I'll just quickly talk through these two key points really about the evolving role of civil society. I think that one of the things that we're increasingly seeing is a move away from elitist models. So there are actually organizations amongst us who are able to go to donors and say, your values do not align to ours. Yes, you want to give us a big pot of money, but we really do not feel that this responds to the need that has arisen from our constituency or the community that we're working in. We're seeing civil society organizations increasingly collaborating and partnering with other agencies, so that peer collaboration, whether it's, you're doing joint fundraising or you're pooling funds or you're implementing jointly. And really, a lot of this is also being fueled by access to technology. Because now it's easier. We have platforms like your TikToks, your Instagrams, your Facebook, WhatsApp, which are able to connect people, which are able to provide anybody, with a platform to voice themselves and to voice what they would like to see happening. So with that, there are all these movements of, hashtag Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Not in My Name, Fridays for Future. All these things are springing up, and it's another demonstration of the changing nature of civil society. Yes, it is, okay, I'm going to come to that point later, where we're not necessarily always structured formally, but we're seeing an increase in informal movements, and issues-based movements as well. The other thing that we're seeing really is a shift away, no, please go back, is a shift away from, please go back. Public partnership models. We're seeing more venture capitalists actually funding innovative ways of doing things. They're saying, look, we know the civil society sector has received funding, but we would like to see things done differently. We're willing to give you money for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years, to test a prototype of something that could work in your context, in your community. We're seeing more and more of those. And funders saying, not only do we want you to see more innovation, we actually want big bets. So identify one issue or 2 issues that you can run with, and do it well. Don't spread yourselves too thin. Just identify 1 or 2 issues that you can run with, and you can demonstrate and attribute changes to the interventions that you're making. Big bets that are actually going to have an impact. So we're actually looking at what can actually help us scale up. We're tired of working in silos in small little communities. What can actually help us make a big difference? Because when you think about it, if we're honest with ourselves, we say we want to challenge inequality, we want to bring about transformation. How are you going to do that when your project is reaching 25 people in one small village? How is it possible for you to partner and to use tools and to use the resources that you have to scale it up even further? Reach 2,000 people, 200,000 people, because that is actually where you're going to see the tide turning, when you impact on a lot more individual lives. Next. Next. So some of the key things that we're actually noticing, we're observing the key changes in terms of how civil society is operating now. I've spoken about, being more intentional in partnering based on our values, partnering based on interventions that can truly be scaled. And something that is coming up really strongly is learning to partner with government. And I know a lot has been spoken about this, but I want us to take a step back, just one little step, and to say when we go to communities and we are designing, if it's a participatory approach, and we're designing, we're co-creating, we're co-developing an intervention, a project or a program, we're involving the community. We set our indicators, we know what our targets are, What is the next step from there? The next step is not for us to go and do a log frame and do the project document. Infrastructure, food security, access to resources. That's the type of change that we're really looking at. Next. The other three key changes in the way that we work, and I'll just run through them, I won't spend too much time, is we're actually seeing, and partly it's also because of what has happened with the stop work orders that we've received from the US, right? For those who are funded by USAID, for instance, but also many of the other European-based development partners. What we're now doing is we're actually looking inward. We're looking at who are the high net worth millionaires, billionaires in Tanzania. What are the family foundations that we have in this country? Who do we have? Your Aliko Dangotes, your Mo Ibrahims. How can we tap into the resources and the finances that are already on the continent, that are already in our countries? Because you might look at family foundations and say, oh, their geography is only, it's only focused in Arusha. But the reality and the truth is that, which works to our advantage actually, is that the likelihood of them pursuing more localized interventions is high. They are interested in assisting their immediate community. So the chances for a greater impact are very high as well. So that is something that we're looking at the high net worth individuals amongst us and helping them as civil society craft philanthropy programs that will help us meet our development targets. We're looking at increased collaborations amongst and between institutions. We're seeing a lot of cross-regional collaboration. I've seen partnerships between East and Southern Africa, Southern and West Africa, and that really is commendable. And then I guess the fourth change in the operations that we're seeing really is greater efforts to include and work with communities. I think we've spoken so much about this over the past at least 10 to 15 years. We recognize the value that our end users, and I don't use the term beneficiaries, they are end users, they are, using that product, that's, tapping into that service, and oftentimes it's our communities. There's a saying that says that only the wearer of the shoe knows where it pinches. You will not know how painful or uncomfortable that shoe is because you do not walk in those shoes. And so we really need to go back to basics and be more intentional about meaningfully engaging and involving our communities. Because it's true, it was already mentioned in the previous sessions, we do not hold all the answers. We are not the thought leaders. We are not the experts, or at least all the expertise does not lie in us. It lies across so many of us, and so it only makes sense, that we receive input from different stakeholders, including our community members. Now I'm going to rush quickly through the next two sections. Next slide, please. interrogating our purpose and relevance, the impacts of governance and accountability on value creation for our citizens. I believe that value is created in three main ways. Other people can dispute that, but in my studies and research, I narrowed it down to three areas. The first is the perceptions of the community or the end users. You know, you can be a small organization. If the community feels that you've responded to a need that they had, and it's actually positively impacted in their lives, there is a greater likelihood of your organization having a very positive image. You know, so if you work with, you know, branding and communications, you know, it's not necessarily about all the, you know, beautiful flyers you put out. It's really about how people connect with your identity or your brand. And that is based on how well you meet their needs. The second really is how accountable we are. We're always writing reports to our donors, you know? But how do we demonstrate, which is great because we need to be accountable for the resources that they're, you know, that they're entrusting us with. How do we, you know, demonstrate the actual impact, the actual change, how we've actually touched people's lives on a normative day-to-day basis? And so we need to learn to be accountable to our communities. And maybe there will be other sessions where we can actually unpack what it means to be accountable to communities. It's small things. It's like having feedback mechanisms. Are you able to go back to your, you know, to the communities that you serve and ask them a quick poll, a quick survey, or sit down in focus group discussions and say, what did you think of this program? Did this project actually meet, you know, the set targets that we had jointly set together? Or if you're talking about the very beginning of the project cycle, you know, it's where you sit down and you actually plan with the community. You go into communities and say, based on our research and our findings, this is what the intervention we think we should run with. But what do you think? How should we move forward in this process? So there are different ways of being accountable to our constituencies. And then finally, value creation is actually created in our governance mechanisms. So we're not saying that each and every one of us needs to go out and register. It's necessary to be registered for some. But if you are a movement, you know, a social enterprise, how are you going to make sure that you are structured in such a way that, you know, we know who you are, we know where you're operating from, we know that the interventions that you're deploying are actually in sync with the development processes of that community and that you're not actually creating harm. So there needs to be some vehicle, you know, some that allows us, you know, to hold you accountable and where necessary, you know, to report and provide feedback on your interventions. Next slide. And then I'll read and I'll try quickly to talk through these things. Some of the challenges that we have, why we might not be realizing the impact that we should, and I'm calling them barriers to value creation, I think because we are not actually interrogating certain truths, and I'm hoping that if anything, you know, when we walk away from this at an individual level, at an institutional level, we're going to go back at the end of this week and ask ourselves some very pertinent questions, because they will help us answer whether we're truly meeting our purpose, whether, you know, we're adding any value, whether, you know, there's any relevance to our work. And the first is that we have actually become complacent. There is laziness in the sector. Some of us have become so comfortable, and at the end of the day, it's just about the paycheck that I take home. You know, I lose sight of why I am in this role and why I am implementing a specific program. Our relationships have become very transactional, and that's the truth. We employ somebody. As long as we give them money at the end of the month, we're not really measuring and checking whether or not their programming is having an impact at a community level. when we go into communities, we just quickly call together, do you call it a baraza? I don't know. You just quickly call together anybody and everybody who's walking on the street. We haven't taken the time to invest in actually engaging with our communities so that they can make meaningful contributions, so that their participation and their presence is actually meaningful. So we've become complacent, and that is an area that we really need to work on. One of the things in italics there, one of the things I was saying is that, yes, it's important to give, but we can also look at non-monetary ways of motivating, ourselves. When you look at the concept of really Ubuntu, just centering humanity, centering, issues around solidarity and how we can reciprocate. There are many examples in the way we do things in Africa. So I picked up those two Swahili words, because I think that they encompass what we're talking about. There is, and don't laugh at me, I'm going to try, kujitolea, right? Which means, well, for me, in my language, it would mean like to pick up, so that you could act, to stand up really and take action. And I understand here it means, to volunteer or to sacrifice. And then you've got kunjangia. Is that correct? Kuchangia. To contribute. So really, I just want to show that in our everyday language and in the way that we do things as African communities, African societies, the concept of giving and philanthropy work and the work that we are doing is nothing new. So if we've lost sight of focus, if we've lost energy, maybe we should just go back to our roots and try and draw some inspiration on how we can do things differently, more responsively, and in a way that actually makes sense. The other thing that I think that the other truth we need to interrogate is that we actually have a lot of influence. We go around saying, we need more space, we need to do this. We've actually got a lot of influence as civil society, and we should not hide from the fact that we wield a lot of power. We actually do. And so, when you, for instance, go into a community, we're providing we're doing a project, we're providing a resource, we're paying. We need to interrogate things like, what are we doing in terms of influencing the resource flows? Remember, every community has got assets and resources. It's not like, it's not like we're going there and it's empty. So when we go in and we're implementing our projects, what is that signal that's being sent to donors, but most importantly, to government and people who are supposed to implement? We need to be very careful that we do not crowd out the state. The government has a responsibility to meet certain social development, socio-economic programs. It is their responsibility. We can partner and assist, but we should partner in such a way that we do not undermine those collective development targets. And I suppose the best way of saying this is that we go into communities and then, we pump a lot of money into it, and then all of a sudden, the local development fund is no longer being used to, purchase drugs for that community, because organization X, Y, and Z came with their voluntary healthcare workers whom they pay, and it really just distorts the whole resource flow. Because from the outside, it looks as though this community has got all the resources it needs. After all, these NGOs and donors are there. But in reality, it's not. So those are some of the truths that we need to interrogate. Are we not doing more harm? How can we make sure that we partner better with the state, for instance? Especially for those of us who are providing direct services. Okay. So, I'm going to quickly go through the last, just 3 minutes, for the last few slides. honestly speaking, we're tired of seeing the same faces and hearing the same voices. So now that we've got grassroots movements, for instance, that are coming up, how do we make sure that they join us in these spaces so that maybe together we can come up with more creative ways of doing things and doing things differently? Next slide. Oh, it's actually the conclusion. I think we skipped something. But it's okay, because I'm going to ask that this is availed on the internet. Yeah, just to conclude, really, 3 key things. If we're truly going to be transformative, we need to acknowledge that we need to work differently. We're calling on civil society to find ways that are more immersive, that are more participatory, and what that means is that it's a very intense way of working, because you don't just rock up in a community and say, we're going to implement this. You need to sit down and actually reach a consensus, an agreement with community members on how you're going to move forward. And that takes a lot of resources, not just monetary, but time as well. It's an intense way of working. It requires for us to be very intentional, to interrogate our assumptions, and the reward really is that it could be very impactful, and there are greater possibilities for scaling up. The second thing is that we know that there's a direct link between development and governance. As a sector, we need to recognize that our legitimacy, value creation, downward accountability is very important. And we can only attain this by being more community-centered. So let us bring back the people to the center of the work that we do. Finally, as civil society, we need to critically reflect on how we partner, how we coordinate, we collaborate, and we co-create with other stakeholders, but especially our communities and our governments. Because as we're searching for, redefining our identity, our purpose, and relevance, the answers actually lie in how well we partner and engage with those 2 constituencies. Thank you so much, Program Director.
Thank you. A big applause, please. Tupigie makofi wakati anakuja kukaa. I'm not going to summarize what she has said, but just the last 3 points, what we need to do. 1, we need to realize and appreciate. It takes time, it needs thinking, analysis, in order to realize what we have done. 2, there is a very close link and relationship between development and governance. And therefore, these 2 are important to think through. But finally, we must make sure that we improve partnership and co-creation. We have just seen an evidence here. A partnership has been signed as an evidence in front of us. So we are making progress. Asante sana. Asante nikiwe kwa hiyo. Rachel, you have 5 minutes.
I thought you said it was 15.
No, 5 now.
Habari za asubuhi. Makadi yenyu. Okay, so that's essentially saying the same thing, but in my language. So I think for me, the contribution I will make to the discussion will be more along the lines of provoking. Some of it may not be comfortable, but I guess, that's why we are here. That is what is involved in rethinking and reimagining, right? And I think the first part of my minute, of my 5 minutes, will definitely be speaking to some of the gaps I have seen. So as introduced, some of the work that I've been doing has been to strengthen capacities for different actors, so like-minded and not so like-minded, to work together on shared or common interests or purposes from a systems perspective. So I will start with an observation I've made. So working with national education groups, national education coalitions, broad-based coalitions in 4 countries. Tanzania is one of them, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and also Mozambique. And it's also common from the past, and it still is continuing, a narrow focus on isolated issues. So for example, these coalitions call for increased budget resources for teaching and learning materials, right? Increased textbooks. But in the advocacy and in the programming, there is a neglect to engage with the other elements within which are involved in ensuring that the money actually translates into the output that we want. These are the textbooks. So in this instance, engaging with procurement systems is something that is essential and key to the translation of this commitment or this request to have the budget increased. And if the money is made available, how then does this money then translate into the textbooks? So there are other parts of the system that we would need to be engaging with to follow through the service provision. So that's one gap. Another gap is, or another example rather, from Zambia. For a number of years, civil society groups in Zambia were pushing for an increase in constituency development funds. And when the current government, when it went into power about 3.5 years ago, that was one of the things that they did, and everyone was very happy. They more than quadrupled the amount available for constituency development funds. But in the last 2 years, evidence is showing that local authorities are retaining those funds because they are unable to utilize those resources. The system, the local government system, was not prepared to handle those kind of resources to be able to offer, to meet the needs or to drive community development at that level. And so does civil society have to backtrack to say, no, maybe not. Maybe we could have sequenced our requests and focused on preparing the local government system to be able to absorb these resources so that it is able to offer and function in the way that we wanted to meet the needs of communities. I think other gaps, I think it speaks to poor mechanisms that speak to downward accountability. I think that has been raised in the presentation. And also, we are not committed to our structured approaches for learning within our own institutions. When we don't learn, when we learn superficially, the product is superficial. And so there are gaps in terms of having structured approaches to learning and centering it in what we do. And then I think most of our value has been, obviously, I think from the survey, I know the analysis will come, but I know there was a big response rate around having our, what we do influenced by donor models and the like. Yeah. Most of our value is derived from deliverables. We thrive on deliverables and outputs, but not necessarily paying attention. So I can give an example from the Kingdom of Eswatini. And the organizations there, the civil society groups there, they're working in very tough conditions, but they celebrate, and as they should, having trainings and workshops that involve the government, that involve the king's advisors. It's great, but there's very poor reflection on how those meetings are actually making an impact on or strengthening the mutual relationship that exists between the kingdom, the monarchy, and the citizens, or the state and the citizens. So there has to be a level where that has to be completed. So we have to move beyond these deliverables to look at how is this actually shifting the norms? How is this actually disrupting some of the harmful power dynamics that exist within our communities? And I think why I'm here, weak regional integration in terms of learning. We've done quite a lot in terms of documenting what we're doing, but we have very few mechanisms to pull ideas, to pull our lessons together from a regional perspective for civil society. And I think this is some of the, an example I can cite in looking at some of the work from SADC, with working with non-state actors, you find that a group in Mozambique, for example, has been identifying climate adaptation strategies and bringing out lessons. But you find that there are lessons and there isn't any space in which they're aligning some of this learning with their counterparts from Zambia, from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, mainly because the climatic shocks are similar. The challenges are similar, and the adaptation frameworks, some of them are also very similar, but very poor coordination mechanisms to actually learn together from a regional perspective. Some considerations I have. I hope I'm left with a minute. 2 minutes, oh, nice, okay. We have okay, so some considerations on some practical ways in which our identity and our positioning and our relevance can actually be amped up would be a focus moving beyond interventions, but looking at interactions. So understanding our work from a systemic perspective. The different parts are connected to each other. The different actors are connected to each other. So we definitely want to see more of multi-sectoral alliances, transnational alliances as well, and also focused on the connections, strengthening those connections, because they will likely stay longer or will likely evolve much better than having an output that is not locally owned and will definitely die in the next 5 years.
Thank you. You need just to wrap up.
Okay. No, I think so. Facilitating platforms for collective action matching. So in terms of collective action matching, I think that speaks to my concern on the pooling of lessons from a regional perspective, but also at a national level and also at district level as well. Some key 3 things that I think are still things that in the future will add to the value or that give civil society relevance is probably the role of civil society in driving accountability, the role of civil society in amplifying the voices of women, youth, informal workers in an increasingly informal economy, I think those are some of the key things that will remain and we can push towards. Thank you.
Thank you. Tumzie makofi tafadhali. Wakati namkaribisha Masawe kwa sababu ya muda. Masawe, utaongea kwa Kipogoro au? Una dakika 3 za kurudia yale ambayo yamesemwa. Una mambo mapya yapi ambayo unadhani ni muhimu sasa hivi kuchagiza hapa?
Mimi kwa kikubwa nilikuwa nataka kujaribu kulocalize the motion kwa sababu my fellow contributors they've been more of regional perspective, lakini nataka kuiangalia kitanzania zaidi ambapo wengine wote tuliokuwa hapa ni sehemu ya hii sekta. Na ukiangalia kwa sekta hii, how do you position yourself for CSO in Tanzania? Hatuwezi kuizungumzia bila kuangalia historical background ya hii nchi na political landscape ambayo na define most of our structures, how we cooperate, how do we work, and the nature of our work we do and how we design our work. Kwa hiyo zinakuwa affected sana na historia ya huko nyuma. Mtajua kwamba hii sekta kwa Tanzania ni ngeni. Na ni ngeni kwa sababu kabla ya multi-party politics, CSO ilikuwa inaonekana kama vile ni sehemu ya siasa. Kwa hiyo haikuruhusiwa. It was not a part of haikuwepo kabisa. Na CSO tulizokuwa nazo kipindi kile zilikuwa ni party wing. Unavyosikia UVCCM ndio itetea haki za vijana, UWT haki za wanawake, JUATA ndio trade union. Nafikiri profesa yuko hapa atatusaidia vizuri, anaelewa profesa Wangwe. Kwa hiyo ni vitu ambavyo tulikuwa katika mazingira hayo. Na ndio maana hata baada ya vyama vingi mwaka 92 ndio tuliona mushrooming of CSOs na kuja. Lakini hata zilizokuja mwanzoni ambazo zilikuja very focal na vikajaribu kujionyesha tofauti, kwa mfano kupambania haki za wanawake, marekebisho ya sheria na mengine kama hizo zilipata matatizo, moja hapo ikiwa BAWATA. BAWATA ilisajiliwa mwaka 98, mwaka 97 sijui ilifutwa. Walienda mahakamani wakashinda 2009, lakini hawakuwahi kurudi Matubaijuka na wenzake. Lakini walifutwa kwa sababu gani? Walifutwa kwa sababu waliambiwa wanafanya siasa. Lakini siasa waliokuwa wanafanya ni kuomba sheria sheria za mirathi, sheria hizi zinazopigia kelele siku hizi, na pia nafasi ya mwanamke katika jamii. Wakaonekana kwamba ni siasa, na wakaambiwa warudi wakarekebishe katiba yao iwe ya kuwezesha watu kiuchumi na wanawake kiuchumi zaidi. Walifanya hivyo. Mwaka 97 serikali bado haikupendezwa, wakaamua kufuta. Lakini fast forward 2020, nadhani kuna mashirika ambayo hapa yana miaka 30, 20, 10, 5, lakini kama kuna rebirth of CSO or NGO in 2020, na niwaambie most of you now you are half life. Half life in what means? Ni kwamba come 2030 wote mtakuwa hamna registration, kwa sababu sheria ilirekebishwa ikasema lifespan ya shirika ama shirika ya kijamii ambayo ni NGO ni miaka 10. Na mtakumbuka sheria ilipitishwa nafikiri around kwa mwezi wa 9, sheria namba 3. Na wote tulicomply. Ni kitu kizuri comply, kwa sababu ndio njia pekee ya kusurvive. Lakini come 2030 wote hapa tutaperish kama hawata revive au hawata renew our licenses. How do we position ourselves? Je, na kwa muda huu wote ambao tumekuepo, maisha yamekuwa marahisi kama mnavyofikiria? Je, funding position imekuwa nzuri kama ilivyokuwa before au ikoje? Lakini political landscape inaendeleaje kwa affect kazi za CSO Tanzania? Kwa sababu tumeambiwa mambo ya co-creation and partnership. Lakini co-creation and partnership kwa Tanzania is more transactional. Kwa mashirika ambayo yanafanya kazi na serikali hapa kwa njia moja au nyingine watakubaliana na mimi. What are we getting out of this partnership? That's what matters. So what changes are you bringing the community? Sio. Ni tofauti kabisa, what are you getting? Kuna baadhi ya miradi nimeiona mingi sana, tumeshiriki, tumefanya pamoja, lakini unakuta it's more of transactional. Kwa hiyo mwisho wa siku hata kujua kufanywa evaluation baada ya mradi, unaambiwa uleta mabadiliko gani kwa kufanya kazi labda kwa hizi partnership au kufanya co-creation, what did you bring as a changes to the community? Unakuta hujafanya chochote, na kuna wenzetu wapata shida hawezi kusema. Kwa hizo partnership na co-creation ambazo tunaambiwa na nikiwa hapa they work better. Lakini how do we build trust, our presence in the community? Kuna haja sasa ya kujiangaliza mashirika namna gani presence kwenye community zetu zina bring relevance, kwa sababu wakati mwingine tunaongelea kwenye high level sana. Walipokuwa na perform hapa wasanii, nilikuwa nasikiliza baadhi ya nyimbo zao, nikapata kikagaziko kidogo, nikasema kuna watu wakisikia wataweza kasikia labda tunaongea kwenye majukwaa ya kisiasa, kwa kuaminisha watu kwamba tumeachana na kuni, tunaweza kuzungumzia kwenye urban sectors, lakini ukienda kwenye community unaweza kukuta ni kitu ambacho bado hata hakijafikirika. Kwa hiyo kuna baadhi ya vitu tuweze kubuild trust na mahusiano mazuri na community, hasa ambao ni grassroots community. Miradi tunayo design iende kwenye community. Nimependa sana mikataba mlio saini hapa, kwa mfano tuwaweza na Vodacom. Unaona namna gani anaweza kukuletea kitu ambacho kimegusa mwanafunzi mmoja mmoja au shule moja moja, na namna gani kinaleta tofauti. Hizo zero mliosema mweza kuziondoa, hizo zero ziko zinaenda wapi baada ya pale? Kwa sababu sasa hivi tunashabikia kupeleka vibarua Uarabuni. Yaani sasa hivi tunaona ni achievement. It started in Kenya, I was laughing at them. Lakini we are doing similar thing. Kwamba sasa hivi tunarecruit vijana, tunawapeleka Uarabuni wakawe vibarua, na tunaona ni achievement, na mwisho wa siku tutarekodi kama ni success. Lakini what are we doing as CSO? What are we bringing as a changes to the community? Mwisho wa siku ndio tunaambiwa tumeridhika, complacent. Kwamba tumeridhika kwamba ni mambo ni mazuri, lakini kwa vile tu tunasoma ilani, tunasema ilani imeshasema 1, 2, 3 mambo ni mazuri. Tujifunze kufanya evaluation ya hizi ilani zikiisha, hata budget zikiisha. Wakati tunapitisha budget hii, tunatabia kupitia budget iliyopita ilitekelezwa namna gani? Je, na budget mpya ina promise kitu gani? Na ilani hizi zina promise kitu gani, na iliyopita ilikuwa inasemaje na imetekelezwa kwa kiasi gani? Kwa hiyo lazima tujiposition kwenye hizo nafasi, tuweze kujengea jamii yetu uelewa mpana, na tuweze kujenga hiyo trust na relevance to our community. Nadhani muda wangu sio rafiki sana. Asante mzee.
Asante sana Masawe kwa kutumia muda vizuri, na umegusa maeneo kabisa ambayo sasa yanatupeleka kwa dakika chache zilizobaki. Nitaomba dakika 2 tusikie sasa kutoka kwenu. Tumesikiliza wawezeshaji watatu hapa, wameongelea perspective tofauti. Moja zimegusa experience ya region, lakini tunapata concrete examples zote na complement kwa yale tuliokuwa tumezungumza asubuhi hapa. Sasa nitaomba, sio kama kuna mtu anaweza kutembeza mic, kama kuna mtu ana comment, swali, naomba tafadhali nisaidie. Tuanzie hapa. Swali lako liwe swali fupi straight kwa presenter, alafu
Thank you. My question goes to the two beautiful sisters from Southern Africa Trust. What you have presented is what we always hear, but say differently. And I want you to reflect and give this audience 3 practical, radical ideas of how we can achieve pathway to progress in the midst of what is happening currently, in the midst of all these shakeups that are happening, that are threatening the existence of civil societies. What are the 3 radical ideas that will take us to that pathway to progress?
Thank you. Ulikuwa na mkono pale? Oh, sorry.
No, I can start. Mine is, I think I've written it down, I can actually show you. I was going to ask the same question to our 2 lovely sisters, exactly the same. We have heard so much of what you have told us today over so many years. And I think it is almost a song that we sing all the time. Community engagement, working in partnerships, collaborations, and rethink, and all of that. Like, these are the kind of things we talk about all the time. But what we're really keen to hear about is, given the circumstances and the situations and the disruption that is going on currently, what are the key concrete recommendations on how we move forward from where we are at the moment? And then there was a little comment, a comment that was made on something called action matching, if I got that correctly. Please give us examples of that, because I think maybe not all of us understand exactly where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is also along the same lines, and it is specifically on the aspect of professionalization, because the way you have talked about it, it paints a picture as if professionalization of the civil society is a bad thing. Yes, it has resulted into unintended consequences, but there were reasons why we had to professionalize, or this field had to become professional. So I think the question now becomes, how then can we make sure that we take advantage of the professionalization and we prevent the unintended bad outcomes of this field becoming too professional? I think that's a question we can all reflect on, not necessarily just the 2 of you, but everybody in the room, that there is a reason why we became too professional. How do we prevent professionalization becoming a bad thing? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will give time for response.
Okay, I think I will start. Okay, so it's great to know that this is stuff that's being spoken about and it has been repeated over and over again. But maybe the fact that it's actually being said again, maybe the fact that there's a problem there. Are we maybe asking the wrong questions to one another or to each other even? On a radical concept I've been thinking about, especially from my own context within Zimbabwe. I hope that I do have a home to go back to after saying this. But one of the things that I've been thinking about has been to actually see if there can be drives that look at galvanizing or creating opportunities where the civic, what is the civic value, what is being a citizen, actually be reframed and discussed but not by civil society, but by citizens themselves, bringing them together across different ages. So that's something that I'm thinking, because I think in Zimbabwe, the people have been left out. And I think to have them set out to say, maybe from a moral basis, what is it being a citizen? What does it mean to be this? And then maybe we use those as our values that then inform how we engage and participate with one another. I think I'll also just speak a little bit more on collective action matching. So tested in the Dominican Republic by groups of women. And I think it's identifying, I think in the previous social accountability language, it's interlocers, but then identifying specific connectors in communities that bring together. So there's this big picture, but within civil society, there are different groups working on different focus areas. But the who keeps the big picture in mind, and then creating a platform that connects how these are feeding into each other as part of the bigger tapestry, as part of the bigger puzzle, because each of these are pieces in a puzzle. So this includes low-cost pilots, because it's expensive, it could become expensive, action pods, learning pods. So these action pods are focused not on storytelling, but on story doing, right? We actually profile how we are solving problems instead of actually talking about it in the past and that this is what we then did. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Nikiwe.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to belabor the point that, well, you felt there was nothing new. I actually think that one of the mistakes that we make is that because some of us have been here longer and we've been hearing this more and more, but there's some people who have been here for a shorter time and it might be relatively new to them. So there's actually a disconnect between those in the sector that have been here for longer and those, new entrants. And I actually feel that we're not doing enough, for younger people who are coming into the sector. There is a dearth of expertise. We take it for granted. So even our capacity strengthening approaches, we need to relook at, because I really feel like we just don't invest. I don't know whether it's the type of issues that we're addressing, that we're talking about, or the actual type of skills that we're imparting. So that is something that we just totally overlook. Which brings me to my second question. When you look around you, ask yourself who is in this room. Are the people who are supposed to be in this room? Because right now, I actually think that we should have had a lot more community-based entities represented here. And not organizations, including movements, loose formations, that go out there, they advocate, and they do the work that we're doing differently, and oftentimes in more innovative ways. So, at the threat of this becoming another talk shop, we are talking to ourselves. How do we make sure we bring the right people into these spaces? We share this space so that we can actually see traction in the sector. So I don't have concrete answers, but I have questions around the way we are doing things. Why is it that 20 years after I've joined the sector, we're still talking the same issues? And I'm a gray-haired woman with kids now. It shouldn't be that way. It actually means that we need to interrogate ourselves and the reasons why we're doing these things. And then just quickly around professionalization, yes, maybe it didn't come out very well. I myself went and did a PhD to study civil society. So I'm all for professionalizing. I am all for getting trained people, articulate people, people who know what they're talking about, you know, but that is not the answer. It's not the only answer. That's why we've seen a proliferation of movements, because young people are actually saying, you are not going to box us and tell us when we can mobilize, what we can talk on, how we're going to advocate. We're just going to, as a social movement and issues-based, and that is why, you know, the issue around futures thinking and trends analysis, I think that is something that we're not paying attention to as the sector. We are not able to, or maybe we don't have strong enough skills to read the room, you know, and to actually anticipate, you know, how we should respond differently. We are actually very reactionary. How do we step away from working in that mode? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just want to put a footnote on these responses. The fact that we keep talking about these issues day after day, it's probably that we still need to do more. We have not done enough. So listening to the same issues of yesterday, last week and last year, it's not bad, but maybe let us not lament on the histories and what has happened, but let us use it as a lesson on how to move forward. As I said in my introduction, this was complementary to what other discussion in the morning, and probably the first sessions do not need to bring out answers, but as we discuss with the other sessions which are coming, by Friday, we will be able to come up now jointly as a group with some innovative ideas on how we move out of this instead of waiting from the experts. We were told by the panelists this is what we need to do. So I think I'm urging all of us, let us keep remembering where we are coming from, because that's important. History builds the future. That's one. The second thing is that this was just another provoking session on where we are moving. And our panelists are still with us here. If you have any other question, please interact with us, and we will try to clarify what we have. Nimalizie kwa kuwashukuruni sana, asanteni sana, Wajibika inawashukuru na tuendelee kujifunza kwa pamoja, ni sisi sote tutaleta mabadiliko. Asante sana.
Asante sana, thank you very much. A round of applause to the panelists and the moderator for running a very insightful session. As